He didn't come here to be a hero, he came to disappear. After the war, a forgotten veteran and his aging canine dog drove
Echo
into the
base,
frozen
we have a
mountains,
situation
chasing
at.
silence,
Repeat,
not
Sector 4
purpose.
is under siege.
An
We
abandoned
need
ranger
backup
station,
now.
endless snow, no witnesses, no expectations. But when the storms closed the roads and the radio crackled with desperate voices, the fire inside that old station was lit again. And with it, something inside him he thought had died long ago. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Seattle had a way of pretending winter was polite. The city wore its cold like a tailored coat, clean sidewalks in the richer blocks, neat lines of traffic, storefronts glowing with espresso machines and soft music. Yet the wind that came off Elliott Bay still found the gaps in your collar, the little places you didn't think to guard. On that late December morning, the sky was a low sheet of pewter, rain falling in fine needles that never turned to snow but always managed to soak through. The streets around Sodo shimmered with water and oil, and the cranes by the port stood motionless, as if waiting for permission to move. Ethan Cole drove with both hands on the wheel, not because the roads were slick. Seattle handled rain the way a veteran handled a field strip, but because his body liked certainty. Grip, pressure, repetition. The kind of habits that survived long after the uniform was folded away. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered in a way that came from carrying weight for years, not from gyms or vanity. His hair was cut short and dark, already threaded with gray at the temples, and his jaw had the hard angles of a man who rarely let his face go slack. A close stubble shadowed his cheeks. It didn't soften him so much as underline that he hadn't been sleeping well. His eyes were a steady hazel, the kind that didn't flinch, but they had a tired look around them, like the light behind the glass had been turned down. People who met him at a grocery store or a gas station often mistook the stillness for calm. They didn't know it was control. There had been an incident overseas, an IED on a road that wasn't supposed to be there, that left him with a permanent distrust of ordinary mornings. Since then, Ethan had learned to live inside routines and to keep his voice low, not because he was shy, but because loudness felt like a luxury he no longer trusted. In the passenger seat, Briggs watched the city slide by as if it were a training video. Briggs was a 7-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat and a black saddle pattern that darkened along his spine, the fur thick enough to shrug off cold rain. A black working harness hugged his chest and shoulders, worn smooth at the straps where hands had grabbed him in a hurry. His ears stood forward most of the time, even when he looked relaxed, and his amber eyes tracked reflections in windows, pedestrians, and the flick of a turn signal. He had the disciplined stillness of a dog that had spent years reading human bodies for intention. Ethan didn't talk to him the way people talk to pets, all baby words and squeals. He spoke in the same tone he used with himself, simple, steady, honest. Easy, he'd say, or not yet. And Briggs understood, not just the words, but the air behind them. Ethan pulled into a small parking lot behind a low brick building that housed a veteran services office and a clinic. The lot was half full. A flag snapped lightly against its pole, wet and heavy. He sat for a moment with the engine running, listening to the heater fan hiss. It wasn't fear that kept him in the seat. It was the familiar friction of going inside places where people asked questions. He'd learned that grief didn't always arrive as tears, and sometimes it arrived as paperwork and fluorescent lights and someone saying, "How have you been coping?" as if coping was a checkbox. His phone vibrated in the cup holder. The screen lit with an unknown number and a name beneath it, Whitaker Law. Ethan frowned. He hadn't spoken to any lawyer in years, not since he'd finalized the last of his discharge forms and signed away certain promises he'd made to himself. He let it ring once, twice, then picked up. "Cole," a voice answered, measured and professional, with the careful warmth of someone who made a living delivering news. "Mr. Cole, this is Aaron Whitaker. I'm calling regarding the estate of Thomas Cole." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Thomas, his uncle. A name that sat in his memory like an old tool left in a drawer, useful once, then forgotten. "I'm not sure you've got the right person," he said, though he knew he did. "You are Ethan James Cole, nephew and sole listed beneficiary," Whitaker replied. "Your uncle passed away 2 weeks ago in Lincoln County, Montana. He left you the property known as the North Pine Ridge Ranger Station and the surrounding acreage. There are also associated maintenance costs and back taxes. I sent a packet to your last known address. Did you receive it?" Ethan stared through the windshield at the wet asphalt. His throat felt tight, not from emotion exactly, but from the oddness of being pulled into a story he hadn't been paying attention to. "I don't check the mail much," he admitted. "I understand. If you can confirm your address, I can resend. The county requires a decision within 30 days, whether you accept the inheritance or disclaim it. If you accept, we'll need your signature on a few documents. If you disclaim, the property will revert to the county." Revert to the county. Turn into a file number, a lock on a door, another building that slowly fell apart. Ethan imagined a place in Montana he'd barely seen. A ranger station he remembered only as a postcard his uncle once mailed him. No message, just a picture of pines and an old tower. He had been 20 at the time, angry and young and still convinced he could outpace his own family by joining the military. He never wrote back. "What's the catch?" Ethan asked quietly. "There's no catch," Whitaker said. "Just reality. The station has been unused for decades. Your uncle lived there intermittently, according to utility records. I should tell you, there was no money left, no savings. The property is the inheritance." Ethan laughed once, but it wasn't amused. "A broken building in the woods." "It's more than that," Whitaker said, and Ethan caught a flicker of something beneath her professionalism, maybe sympathy, maybe curiosity. "I can't explain why your uncle chose you, but he was specific. He wanted you notified personally." Ethan looked at Briggs, who was watching him now, head tilted slightly, ears lifted. The dog didn't need the words to feel the shift in Ethan's breathing. "Okay," Ethan said. "Send the packet. I'll look." Whitaker confirmed the address, gave him her direct number, and hung up. The silence that followed felt thicker than the rain. Ethan turned off the engine. The clinic appointment could wait. The paperwork could wait. What couldn't wait was the feeling that had begun to press against his ribs, a quiet pressure like a hand on a door that wanted to open. He didn't like being needed by people, not anymore. Need had costs. Need pulled you into things you couldn't fix, but a building wasn't a person. A building didn't demand explanations. A building just stood there, or it didn't. He drove home through the gray city, past glass towers and wet bus stops, and carried Briggs up the apartment stairs as a courtesy the dog didn't require. Briggs was strong, but Ethan had learned to treat his partner like more than equipment. In the apartment, Ethan dug through weeks of untouched mail until he found the thick manila envelope from Whitaker Law. The paper smelled faintly of toner and rain. Inside were documents, a county map, photographs. The North Pine Ridge Ranger Station, a 2-story structure of weathered timber with a broken observation tower, surrounded by dark conifers and open meadow. The roofline sagged a little. Windows stared blankly. And yet something about it tugged at him, not nostalgia, but recognition, like seeing an old scar in a mirror and remembering the shape of the wound. At the bottom of the packet was a letter, not typed. Handwritten, the ink slightly smudged as if it had been held with damp fingers. Ethan knew the handwriting immediately. His uncle's. Tall, narrow letters, the kind written by someone who didn't waste motion. He unfolded the paper and read. "Ethan, if you're holding this, you're already closer than you think. Don't sell it without walking it. Don't hand it to the county without listening to it at night. Take the dog. He'll know. I didn't have much to leave you, but I can leave you a place that doesn't lie." That was all. No apology, no explanation. Just a directive and a strange, steady faith, like Thomas believed Ethan would understand something Ethan didn't yet have words for. Ethan sat at the small kitchen table while Seattle's rain tapped the window in patient rhythm. Briggs lay down beside his chair, chin on his paws, watching him with the calm expectancy of a working dog waiting for the next command. Ethan ran a thumb along the edge of the letter until the paper softened. He could feel the old reflex rising, minimize, detach, return to the plan. He could also feel something else, thin but stubborn, pushing back. Curiosity. a kind of quiet dare. He looked at the map again. Montana felt far in the way. Mountains feel far. Not just distance, but weather and loneliness and roads that might not have cell service. The rational choice was to disclaim the property and keep his life small and contained. The safer choice was to stay in Seattle where he knew the exits and the rules. Ethan folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and stood. His joints protested slightly. They always did in damp cold. He reached for the leash and Briggs rose instantly, tail low but wagging once, controlled and sure. Ethan didn't smile, but his face shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if something inside him had agreed to move. "All right," he said, not to the dog but to the room, to the rain, to the part of himself that had been sitting still for too long. "We'll go see it." He opened the closet and pulled down a duffel bag that still smelled faintly of dust and canvas. Here he began to pack the way he always did, methodical, efficient, preparing for weather and uncertainty. Outside, Seattle kept raining like it always had, but in Ethan's kitchen the air felt different, edged with the first hint of direction. He didn't know what he would find in North Pine Ridge. He didn't yet know what his uncle meant by a place that doesn't lie. But for the first time in a long while, Ethan wasn't trying to outrun anything. He was driving toward something, and Briggs, steady at his side, seemed to already know the way. By the time Ethan Cole left Seattle behind, the rain had thinned into a mist that clung to the windshield like breath on cold glass. Dawn was just beginning to pry open the sky, not with color, but with a lighter shade of gray. He drove east first, then south, then east again, following highways that slowly shed their billboards and coffee stands, trading them for evergreens and long stretches of asphalt where the radio lost its signal without apology. Briggs lay in the back of the SUV, braced against a folded blanket, head lifted just enough to watch the side mirror. He had learned roads the way other dogs learned parks. Long drives meant transition. Transition meant purpose. Ethan drove the way he always did on unfamiliar routes. Steady speed, no sudden moves, eyes scanning farther ahead than necessary. He wore a heavy green jacket, civilian issue, worn soft at the elbows, and a knit cap pulled low over his ears. At a rest stop east of the Cascades, where the air sharpened and the smell of wet cedar gave way to snow and iron, he stopped for fuel. The station was nearly empty. One pump worked. The others were taped off with cracked yellow plastic that snapped lightly in the wind. Inside the small convenience store stood a woman behind the counter, late 50s maybe, with silver hair pulled into a loose braid that rested over one shoulder. Her name tag read, Sarah M. She was tall and spare, built like someone who had spent most of her life standing, and her face had the composed lines of a person who had learned patience the hard way. Her skin was weathered but clear, eyes pale blue and sharp, the kind that noticed details without staring. When Ethan came in, she nodded once, not friendly, not unfriendly, simply acknowledging a fact. "Coffee's fresh," she said, voice calm, edged with a gravelly warmth. "If you're heading east, you'll want it." Ethan poured himself a cup. "Looks like winter's ahead of schedule." Sarah glanced toward the window, where light snow had begun to fall, slow and deliberate. "Winter's always on schedule out here," she replied. "People aren't." There was no small talk after that, just the quiet understanding that came from shared geography. When Briggs entered, she crouched slightly, letting him sniff the air, her movements unhurried. "Working dog," she observed. "You can tell by the way he watches before he moves." "Used to be," Ethan said. Sarah smiled, not wide, but genuine. "They don't really stop." She rang him up and slid the receipt across the counter. As Ethan turned to leave, she added, "Road through Idaho's clear for now. Montana will be another story. If you're going north, watch for whiteouts past Missoula." He nodded. "Thanks." Outside, Ethan let Briggs stretch, the dog's muscles rippling beneath his coat as he shook once, sending fine crystals of snow into the air. Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came with open space and changing weather. Not fear, exactly, but vigilance. The farther he drove, the quieter the world became, and the more he felt his thoughts rearrange themselves, settling into a simpler pattern. Road, sky, dog, next decision. By late afternoon, Mountains rose around him like dark walls, their peaks lost in cloud. Snow thickened, not dramatic, just persistent. Ethan crossed into Montana under a sign half buried at the base, its edges rimmed with frost. The land opened into wide valleys where barns leaned and fences cut long lines through white fields. Cell service dropped to nothing. The radio offered static and then silence. Ethan turned it off. At a narrow two-lane road outside a town so small it barely earned a name on the map, he stopped again. This time it was a feed and supply store with a single porch light glowing amber against the snow. Inside smelled of hay, leather, and cold metal. A man stood near the counter, tall and broad, with a thick gray beard that covered most of his jaw and a scar that pulled the corner of his mouth down slightly, giving him a permanently skeptical expression. He wore a wool coat patched at the elbows and gloves with the fingers cut off. "Evening," the man said. His voice was low, steady, worn smooth by years of speaking over wind. "Road's getting mean." "Headed to North Pine Ridge," Ethan replied. The man studied him openly, then glanced at Briggs. "That old ranger station?" "Yes." A pause stretched. The man's eyes softened just a fraction. "Name's Caleb Horn," he said. "My family's been here since before the mill shut down. That place hasn't had steady company in a long time." Ethan waited. He had learned that silence often did the work for you. Caleb nodded once, as if deciding something. "Your uncle kept to himself, fixed things when no one was looking. Didn't talk much, but he watched the weather like it owed him money." He reached under the counter and slid a paper-wrapped bundle toward Ethan. "Extra kerosene. Don't argue." "I wasn't going to." Caleb's mouth twitched. "Good. You'll want to take the forest road at mile marker 12. Main access is half collapsed. Snow drifts bad near the ridge. If you see the tower before dark, you're close enough." Outside again, the light was fading fast. Ethan drove on, the road narrowing, trees crowding in, their branches heavy with snow. Briggs shifted upright, ears forward now, body taut with attention. The forest felt different here, not threatening but alert, like a place that noticed when someone entered. The tires crunched over packed snow, then ice. Ethan slowed, breathing measured. The ranger station emerged not suddenly, but gradually, as if it had been there all along and was only now allowing itself to be seen, a dark shape among darker trees. The tower leaned slightly, its silhouette stark against the bruised sky. Windows reflected nothing. The building looked smaller than in the photographs, but heavier, grounded, stubborn. Ethan parked near the edge of the clearing. The engine ticked as it cooled. For a moment, he stayed seated, watching snow drift sideways in the wind. Briggs whined once, soft, impatient. Ethan opened the door. Cold hit him immediately, sharp and clean, the kind that didn't negotiate. He stepped out, boots sinking, and scanned the perimeter out of habit. Briggs moved ahead a few steps, then stopped, waiting. His posture was alert but not alarmed. Ethan recognized it instantly. Curiosity, not threat. They approached the building together. The door was stiff but intact. A key waited in Ethan's pocket, cold and solid. He hesitated, not from fear, but from the weight of arrival. The road had asked nothing of him. The building, he sensed, might. He unlocked the door and pushed. It opened with a low, tired groan. Inside, the air was dry and cold, carrying the scent of old wood, dust, and something faintly mineral, like stone that had held winter for years. Light filtered in through grimy windows, revealing a space that was stripped down but not abandoned. A table, a chair, a cold stove, maps pinned crookedly to the wall. Briggs entered first, nose low, moving slowly, deliberately. He circled once, then stopped near the center of the room, tail steady, body relaxed. Safe, the dog seemed to say. Or at least, not unsafe. Ethan set his pack down and stood still, listening. Wind moved through the trees outside, but the building itself was quiet, holding its breath. He felt the strange, unsettling sense that the journey had not ended with arrival, only changed shape. He didn't explore further that night. He lit a lantern, fed the stove enough to coax a weak flame, and laid out blankets. Outside, snow thickened, erasing the road behind them. Inside, A fragile warmth began to take hold, just enough to push back the cold. Ethan sat on the floor, back against the wall, Briggs pressed against his leg, solid and alive. He closed his eyes briefly, not to sleep but to mark the moment. He had come to see a building. Instead, he had arrived at a threshold. Whatever his uncle had meant by a place that doesn't lie, Ethan knew one thing with certainty. This place was not finished with him yet. Night settled over North Pine Ridge without ceremony. The wind thinned and then returned in quiet pulses, brushing the walls like a hand testing a pulse. Inside the ranger station, the lantern cast a soft amber circle that did not quite reach the corners. Ethan Cole fed the stove carefully, not to make it roar, just enough to let the iron warm and the room breathe. He had learned in colder places that too much heat too fast could crack things, metal, wood, even people. Briggs lay near the door, his body curled but not asleep, chest rising slow and even. The dog's coat caught the light along the ridge of his back, sable fur darkening to black near the shoulders. 7 years old, still powerful, still precise. His ears twitched at sounds Ethan could barely register, snow slipping from a branch. You see a distant animal stepping through crusted drifts. When Briggs lifted his head, Ethan trusted the movement. When Briggs stayed still, Ethan allowed himself to exhale. Ethan set his pack down by the table and took inventory. He moved through the room methodically, touching without rearranging. Maps pinned with rusted tacks, a cracked compass rose etched into the tabletop, a coil of rope that had been mended twice. On the far wall, a narrow cabinet hung crooked, its door swollen with age. Inside were empty shelves, and at the back, a leather-bound ledger thin enough to be missed. Ethan opened it. The pages were yellowed and sparse, entries written in pencil that had faded to a soft gray. Weather clear, wind north, no visitors, storm moving in, closed access road, fire kept low, no names, no dates. The writing was careful but restrained, as if whoever wrote it had learned to say only what was necessary. Ethan closed the ledger and slid it back, noting the faint smell of graphite and old paper. This wasn't the discovery his uncle's letter hinted at. This was something else, a habit of record, a discipline, a way of staying awake. A sound came from outside then, not sharp enough to alarm, but wrong enough to draw attention. Briggs rose in one smooth motion and moved toward the back wall, nose low. His tail held steady, not stiff, curious, interested. Ethan followed, lantern raised, heart settling into a familiar cadence. Behind the station, the snow was deeper where the trees crowded close. Moonlight broke through cloud in thin ribbons, turning the clearing pale and flat. Briggs stopped near a stand of young pines and sniffed, then looked back at Ethan, eyes bright. He took 2 steps and froze. There, half hidden by brush, stood a horse. She was a bay mare, mid-sized, with a dark mane tangled by wind and snow. Frost rimed her whiskers. She did not bolt when the lantern light found her. Instead, she shifted her weight and watched, sides heaving slightly from cold. A rope hung loose at her neck, frayed where it had once been tied. She looked tired, not frightened, the look of an animal that had waited longer than expected. Ethan lowered the lantern a fraction. He approached at an angle, body relaxed, hands open. "Easy," he murmured, the word carrying less command than reassurance. The mare flicked an ear and stamped once, then stilled. Briggs sat without being told, posture respectful, gaze attentive but soft. Up close, Ethan saw the shallow cut along the mare's shoulder, already crusted over. This and the old brand at her flank, blurred with age. She was no one's wild horse. She had known fences and hands and probably voices that spoke her name. Ethan scanned the tree line, listening. No human footsteps, no light, just the slow creak of timber in the cold. He fetched a flake of hay from a half-rotted bale near the shed, another sign the place had been used more recently than county records suggested, and set it down a few paces away. The mare lowered her head and ate, cautiously at first, then with quiet urgency. Ethan watched the rhythm of her jaw, the steam of her breath. He felt a tug of something he hadn't expected, responsibility, uninvited and undeniable. Inside, he fashioned a temporary shelter by the shed, breaking ice from a trough and filling it from a reserve jug. He moved efficiently, not rushing, while letting the night settle around him. Briggs shadowed his steps, checking corners, scanning the dark. When Ethan finished, He stood back and took in the small arrangement. Hay, water, a horse alive because someone had left a place to stand. As if the thought had weight, the station gave a small sound, a wooden sigh, as a gust pressed against the wall. Ethan turned toward the door and saw it then. A faint glimmer beneath the stove, not light exactly, but reflection. He crouched and brushed ash aside. A metal ring, flush with the floor, almost invisible unless you knew to look. Ethan did not pull it, not yet. He marked the spot in his mind and straightened, breathing through the spike of alertness that rose and fell. If there was something beneath the floor, it would wait. He returned inside, latched the door, and fed the stove once more. Briggs resumed his place by the door, the steady sentinel. Sleep came in pieces. Ethan dozed, woke, listened. At some point near dawn he heard the softest sound, wood on wood, then stillness. He sat up, muscles ready, but Briggs did not move. The dog's calm settled Ethan's pulse. He lay back, his eyes open, and watched the lantern gutter low. Morning arrived thin and blue. The storm had passed, leaving the world hushed and precise. Frost-stitched lace along the window edges. Ethan rose, joints stiff, and brewed coffee on the stove, the smell grounding and simple. Outside, the mare stood with her head over the fence rail, ears forward, expectant. She whickered softly when Ethan appeared, a sound that held neither fear nor demand, just recognition. Ethan fed her again and examined the cut more closely. It would heal, but she would need rest. He scanned the horizon for smoke or tracks, anything that might indicate an owner searching. There was nothing. The forest held its breath. Back inside, with daylight revealing more than lantern light ever could, Ethan returned to the stove. He knelt and lifted the ring. The floor panel came up with a muted complaint, revealing a shallow crawl space, not a cellar, not a hiding place, but storage. Inside were two things wrapped in oilcloth, a compact hand-crank radio and a canvas tube. He unwrapped the radio first. It was old but well kept, the kind used by rangers when storms knocked lines down. He turned the crank and listened, static, then a faint pulse. No voices, not now. He set it aside and opened the tube. Inside was a map hand-drawn, lines confident and spare. The surrounding forest marked with symbols, springs, safe crossings, at places where snow drifted less. In the corner, a note in his uncle's handwriting, "Routes change. People don't. Keep it quiet." Ethan sat back on his heels, the map across his knees. This was not a treasure and not a confession. It was a tool, a way through. He rolled the map carefully and replaced it. The radio went back beside it. He lowered the panel and smoothed ash across the seam until the floor looked whole again. When he stood, Briggs was watching him with that steady, unblinking focus that had once meant an ambush avoided, a life saved. Ethan exhaled and looked around the room, the stove warming, the ledger waiting, the quiet holding. Outside, the mare shifted and stamped, impatient with the morning. The station had not offered him answers, it had offered him work. And then he poured another cup of coffee and made a decision that felt less like a choice than an alignment. He would stay a few days. He would check the trails marked on the map. He would see who, or what, moved through this place when the roads closed and the nights grew long. He would keep the fire honest. When he stepped back outside, the cold met him clean and bracing. The sun lifted over the ridge, touching the tower with pale gold. Ethan rested a hand against the rough timber of the station, feeling the grain under his palm. The night had kept its secrets. The day, he sensed, would ask for something in return. Morning hardened quickly in the high country. What little warmth the sun offered vanished as soon as it rose above the ridge, leaving the air clear and unforgiving. Ethan Cole studied the hand-drawn map at the table, its paper weighted by a compass and a chipped enamel mug. The lines were confident, economical, no flourishes, no legends beyond what mattered. Springs marked with small circles, windbreaks with angled slashes, crossings narrowed where ice tended to hold. The note in his uncle's hand lingered in his mind. Routes change, people don't. It wasn't instruction so much as warning. He packed for a short recon, not a mission. Extra socks, a small first aid kit, a length of rope, the radio. He slung the pack and clipped Briggs's harness, checking buckles with the same care he once gave straps on a ruck. Briggs accepted the gear with quiet focus, tail low, eyes steady. Outside, the bay mare lifted her head from the hay, ears forward. Daylight showed more of her, a narrow blaze down her face, eyes dark and intelligent, a patience that came from being handled well once. Ethan checked the cut again, clean, healing, and tied a strip of cloth at her neck, a simple marker. "I'll be back," he said, feeling foolish for speaking aloud, then less so when she flicked an ear as if acknowledging the promise. They followed the map's first route along a shallow draw where snow drifted less. The forest opened and closed in measured breaths. Briggs ranged ahead, stopping often to scent the air, then returning to Ethan's knee without being called. It was the kind of work that calmed Ethan's thoughts, forward motion, small decisions made well. Yet he noticed signs of passage where the map suggested he would, a broken branch here, a boot print softened by snow there. Not fresh, but not ancient either. At the first marked crossing, the creek ran low and dark beneath a skin of ice. Ethan tested with his pole, listening for the hollow knock that meant danger. He crossed slowly, weight distributed, eyes on Briggs as the dog picked his own careful line. On the far bank, the land rose into a stand of spruce, the trees packed close enough to blunt the wind. Ethan felt the relief of the place without thinking it through. His uncle had known these pauses, where the world eased, if only briefly. The radio crackled then, a whisper of static resolving into a pulse. Ethan stopped, hand on the dial. "Anyone? Copy." The voice faded, then returned closer. He adjusted the antenna and spoke once. "I calm and plain. Station at North Pine Ridge. Go ahead." Silence stretched. Then, faint but clear, This is Miles Avery. I don't know if this is working. I'm off Forest Road 7. Truck won't start. My daughter's with me. We're cold." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, the way he did before stepping into water you couldn't see through. "Copy, Miles," he said. "Stay put. I'm moving your way." They found the truck where the map suggested trouble would gather, a low bend where drifts piled and shade kept ice slick. The vehicle sat angled into a bank, hood up, steam long gone. A man stood beside it, tall and thin, shoulders hunched against the cold. He wore a wool cap pulled down too far and a jacket patched at the elbows. His beard was dark and uneven, flecked with frost, and his face had the tight look of someone trying not to panic. Behind him, a girl sat in the passenger seat wrapped in a blanket, eyes too large for her face. Miles Avery looked up as Ethan approached, relief and embarrassment colliding in his expression. He was mid-30s, with the soft hands of someone who worked with paper more than tools. "I didn't think anyone would hear," he said. "I was just trying." "You did right," Ethan replied. He took in the scene quickly, not unkindly. The engine was flooded, the battery weak. The cold had outpaced them. "What's her name?" "Lena," Miles said, glancing back. "She's 9. We were headed to my sister's place, took a shortcut." Lena watched Briggs with quiet awe. She had straight brown hair cut blunt at the shoulders and a smudge of dirt on her cheek. When Briggs sat and met her gaze, she smiled, a small, brave thing. Ethan worked without hurry. He had Miles wrap his hands and breathe slowly, showed him how to insulate the battery and clear the intake. It would start later, maybe. For now, they needed warmth. He rigged a tow line and guided them back along the route, the station rising into view like a promise kept. Inside, Ethan set them by the stove and fed it with practiced care. The heat took hold gradually, honest and steady. Lena thawed first, color returning to her cheeks. Miles loosened his shoulders, shame easing into gratitude. He apologized too much. Ethan waved it off. "Happens," he said. "Roads don't explain themselves." They drank hot water, sweetened with a spoon of honey. Briggs lay nearby, a calm presence, allowing Lena to touch his fur under Ethan's watchful eye. Outside, the bay mare stamped softly, impatient with the afternoon. Ethan checked the map again, marking the crossing with toggle, a small pencil note, assisted recovery, daylight. He would keep records, but not names, not unless asked. Later, as the light slid toward evening, another sound reached them. Hooves on packed snow. Ethan stepped outside to find a woman approaching on horseback, her posture straight despite the cold. She dismounted with ease and looped the reins with practiced hands. She was in her late 60s, perhaps, hair white and braided tight against her head, her face weathered but strong. Her eyes were dark and assessing, not unfriendly. She wore a long coat mended at the cuffs and gloves, polished smooth by use. "Name's Elowen Pike," she said. "I saw smoke where there hasn't been any for a while." Her gaze took in the mare by the shed. "That yours?" "Not yet," Ethan replied. "She found us." Elowen nodded, as if that answered a question she hadn't voiced. "Thomas used to keep an eye on this place," she said. "Quiet man. Fixed my fence once after the big thaw. Didn't wait for thanks." She looked past Ethan toward the open door, the stove's glow. "Good to see the fire back." Inside, Elowen set a small bundle on the table, bread wrapped in cloth still warm. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight. She showed Miles a better route for his return once the truck started and advised Ethan on the mare's care with the authority of long experience. "She'll stay if you give her reason," Elowen said. "Animals know when a place keeps its word." As dusk fell, Miles's truck turned over at last, reluctant but willing. He pressed Ethan's hand hard before leaving, gratitude plain and uncomplicated. Lena waved at Briggs until the truck disappeared into the trees. When the door closed, the station felt fuller, not louder, settled. Ethan banked the fire and sat, the map spread before him with new marks, new weight. The radio rested nearby, quiet now, but awake. Outside, the mare chewed hay, patient. The day had asked for something, and he had answered without thinking himself into knots. Ethan stood and walked to the window, watching the last light catch the tower's frame. He understood then that staying a few days would not be enough. The routes would keep changing. People would keep arriving. The work would be small and exacting and uncelebrated, and it would matter. He turned back to the room. Oh, to Briggs at his heel, to the fire holding. Tomorrow he would check the next crossing on the map. Tonight he would let the place remember what it was for. The storm did not return that night, but its absence carried its own pressure. Cold pooled in the low places, settling like a held breath. Ethan Cole rose before dawn, the station still and blue with early light, the stove reduced to a red eye behind its grate. Briggs lifted his head as Ethan moved, tail thumping once against the floor, ready without asking why. Outside, the bay mare stood with her flank to the wind, frost lacing her mane. She had slept standing, patient and alert, as if she understood that rest here was provisional. Ethan brewed coffee and studied the map again. New pencil marks joined the old, one for the Avery recovery, one for the creek crossing that had held. The act of marking steadied him. It gave the day edges. He pulled on his jacket and stepped out to check the mare. Up close, in the thin morning light, she looked younger than he'd thought, perhaps 8 or 9, her eyes bright now, appetite returning. He brushed ice from her with the flat of his hand, feeling the warmth under her coat. "We'll find where you belong," he said, not promising more than he could give. By mid-morning, a truck climbed the forest road and stopped at the clearing's edge, the engine cut. A man stepped out, tall and compact, moving with the careful economy of someone who conserved motion. He wore a canvas jacket patched at the shoulder, jeans stiff with cold, and boots scarred by use. His beard was trimmed close, gray threaded through dark, and his hair was cut short enough to show the shape of his skull. His face carried sharp lines around the eyes and mouth, not from age alone, but from decisions made under pressure. But he looked like someone who had learned to work with broken things, wood, metal, maybe people. "Name's Jonah Reed," he said, voice even. "Elowen told me you might need help setting things right." Ethan sized him up, not suspicious so much as thorough. "Depends what you mean by right." Jonah smiled, a brief, lopsided thing. "Safe first, then sound." He glanced at the tower and nodded once. "That ladder won't make it through another freeze." They walked the perimeter together. Jonah tapped beams, tested joints, ran a hand along the railing. He spoke little while he worked, but when he did, it was precise. He had been a carpenter once, before a mill accident took 2 fingers and his appetite for noise. After that, he took jobs where silence was part of the pay. "Place like this," he said, "doesn't need pretty, needs honest." Inside, they tightened hinges, braced a door, reset the latch so it closed without a complaint. Briggs followed Jonah with interest, then settled, satisfied, as if the man passed some unspoken test. By afternoon, the station felt firmer, not warmer, not larger, but steadier. The mare watched from the fence line, ears flicking toward the sound of hammer on wood. While Jonah worked, Ethan checked the radio. Static gave way to a faint, irregular pulse. A voice emerged, breathless and clipped. "Two of us, lost the trail, white out." The signal faded, then returned. Ethan leaned in. "North Pine Ridge Station. I read you. Stay where you are if you can. What's your heading?" The reply came thin and strained. "We thought we were south of the ridge. We're not." Ethan closed his eyes for a count. Whiteout erased distinctions. But his people walked into circles and called them paths. He asked for landmarks, listened, translated fear into information. The map helped, but not enough. He would need another set of eyes. Jonah had already shrugged into his jacket. "I'll take the west spur," he said. "You take the draw. If we don't find them, we funnel them to the creek bend." They moved fast, but not hurried. Ethan felt the familiar narrowing of focus, the way the world simplified under responsibility. Briggs ranged ahead, nose cutting through the cold. Snow stung Ethan's face, wind lifting and dropping in waves. At the creek bend, Briggs stopped, body taut, and barked once, short, sharp, decisive. They found the hikers crouched behind a windbreak, faces rimed white, hands numb. One was a woman in her late 20s with cropped black hair and a cut above her brow, an eyes steady despite the pain. The other was older, a man with a limp and a breath that rattled when he laughed at the absurdity of being found. They were underprepared, but not careless, caught by weather that did not care about intention. Ethan got them moving, set a pace they could keep. Jonah took the rear, quiet and watchful. Briggs walked point, turning to check each face as if counting. Back at the station, the stove took hold again, heat blooming slow and true. The hikers thawed, color returning. Names were offered and gently refused. Ethan logged the recovery without them. The map gained another mark. When the door finally closed behind the last of them, evening had come down like a lid. Jonah wiped his hands and looked around. "You staying?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He banked the fire. He listened to the wind find its way around the building. He thought of Seattle's clean edges and easy exits, of paperwork waiting to be signed. He thought of the mayor chewing hay with patient resolve, of Lena's small, brave smile, of the radio's soft insistence. "Yes," he said, "for now." Jonah nodded, satisfied. "Then we'll do the roof tomorrow." He hesitated, then added, "I lost my wife to a winter road like these. Stayed mad at the snow for years. Turns out it wasn't listening." The admission landed without drama, just fact. It explained the way he worked, the care he took. "Call if you need me," he said, and left before the quiet could turn heavy. Night returned, deep and clean. Ethan sat at the table, the map before him, pencil poised. He added a line to the margin, roof braced, ladder secured. But he fed the stove and watched the flames settle. Briggs lay at his feet, breathing slow. Outside, the mare shifted, content. Ethan understood then that staying carried weight, not the weight of obligation alone, but of attention. This place asked for presence, not ownership. It asked him to keep learning where the ground held and where it fell away, to answer when called, and to be quiet when not. He set the pencil down and let the fire do its work. Tomorrow would bring more weather, more voices on the radio, more choices that would not announce themselves as such. For tonight, the station stood sound, the routes marked, the door latched. The weight of staying felt manageable in his hands, like a tool he could learn to use. The roof work began under a sky the color of burnished steel. Jonah Reed arrived early with a ladder strapped to his truck and a canvas bag of tools that clinked with restrained promise. He moved with the same quiet competence as before, boots finding purchase on frosted rungs, hands steady even when the wind leaned in to test him. Ethan Cole worked below, feeding materials, bracing beams, learning the small grammar of repair, how a nail set just right could change the tone of a wall, how patience mattered more than force. Briggs kept watch near the tree line, ears swiveling, body relaxed but ready. The bay mare stood tethered at the fence, watching the activity with an expression that suggested cautious approval, her dark eyes tracking movement, her breath fogging the air. By midday, the roofline looked straighter. The station, for the first time since Ethan arrived, felt less like a relic and more like a body regaining posture. Jonah wiped his hands and nodded once. "It'll hold," he said. We'll come back for the flashing after the next clear." Ethan thanked him, and meant more than the words carried. Jonah accepted the thanks with a small tilt of the head, then hesitated. "Road'll be busy this afternoon," he said. "Storm pushed folks to try their luck all at once." He left without ceremony, the truck's engine fading into the trees. Ethan was coiling rope when Briggs stiffened, head lifting sharply. The dog's posture changed, not alarmed, not aggressive, but attentive in a way that tightened Ethan's spine. He followed Briggs's gaze to the road. A vehicle approached slowly, tires crunching with deliberation. It stopped short of the clearing. The engine cut. The door opened. A woman stepped out, pausing as if to take measure of the place before committing to it. She was in her early 60s perhaps, with ash-brown hair pulled back into a low knot that had begun to loosen at the edges. Her coat was practical, dark wool worn smooth at the cuffs, and she carried herself with a straightness that spoke of habit rather than pride. Her face was narrow, cheekbones high, the skin weathered by sun and years. Her eyes were a familiar green. Ethan recognized them before he recognized the rest. "Ethan," she said, voice steady but thin at the edges. "I hoped it was you." His breath caught, not with shock, but with the slow recognition of something he had not prepared for. "Margaret," he replied. He did not step forward. He did not step back. Margaret Cole, his aunt by marriage. His Uncle Thomas's widow had been a quiet presence in Ethan's childhood, a woman who listened more than she spoke, who wrote letters he never answered. After Thomas withdrew into the mountains, she had stayed in town, working the library, keeping her grief folded and functional. They had not spoken in years. The silence between them had been clean, almost courteous, and therefore harder to cross. She looked at the station, the smoke rising straight and honest. "He kept it going," she said. "I wondered if anyone would." "He did," Ethan said. He gestured toward the door. "Come in." Inside, Margaret removed her gloves and held them together in her hands, as if unsure where to place them. She took in the room with careful eyes, the map, the ledger, the stove banked just right. "He would have liked this," she said. The order of it." Ethan poured tea. The kettle sang briefly, then settled. Margaret accepted the cup and sat, her shoulders easing a fraction. "I didn't come to claim anything," she said, anticipating a question he had not asked. "The lawyer told me it was yours. Thomas wanted it that way." She hesitated, then continued. "He thought you'd understand the work." Ethan looked at his hands, scarred and capable. "I'm not sure I do." Margaret smiled, a small, tired thing. "Neither did he at first." She watched the steam rise from her cup. "He used to say the station taught him how to listen, not to people. He was never good at that, but to what was needed." They spoke quietly, carefully, circling the years without pressing too hard. Margaret told him of Thomas's routines, his refusals to leave even when offered easier paths. She told him of the night he'd come home soaked and shaking after guiding a family through a blizzard, how he'd sat by the fire without speaking until dawn. "He said the fire did the talking," she said. Outside, the mare stamped, restless. Ethan excused himself to check on her, needing the air. He ran a hand along her neck, feeling the steady heat beneath her coat. She leaned into the touch, just slightly. Briggs watched Margaret through the window, assessing, then returned his gaze to Ethan, satisfied. When Ethan came back in, Margaret stood by the map. "You've marked the crossings," she said. "Good." She traced a line with one finger, stopping near a ridge. "There's a cabin here," she added, "or was. Thomas mentioned it once. Used to be a safe place when the weather turned mean." Ethan nodded. He had not seen it on the map. He added a faint circle, a question mark beside it. "I'll check." Margaret set her cup down and reached into her bag. She withdrew a slim envelope, edges softened by handling. "I brought this for you," she said. "Thomas asked me to give it to you if you came." Ethan opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph. Thomas, younger, standing beside the station with a dog at his heel. Not Briggs, but another shepherd, older, the same watchful posture. On the back, in Thomas's spare hand, a line. "Keep the door latched, not locked." Ethan felt the words settle into him, not as instruction, but as permission. He looked up to find Margaret watching him with something like relief. "He worried you'd think this was punishment," she said. "Or a burden." "It is a burden," Ethan replied. Then, after a beat, It's also useful. Margaret laughed softly. That sounds like Thomas. She glanced at the door. I won't stay. I just wanted to see the fire. She hesitated, then added, If you need supplies, the town will help. Quietly. Ethan walked her out. At the edge of the clearing, she turned. I'm glad it's you, she said. He would be too. She left then, the vehicle easing back down the road, the sound diminishing into trees. Evening came on measured steps. Ethan fed the stove and checked the radio. Quiet for now. He sat with the map and added a note by the cabin Margaret had mentioned. He logged the visit without names. The station felt different after she left, not heavier, but more complete, as if a missing piece had been set in place. Outside, the mare settled, hay crunching softly. Briggs lay near Ethan's chair, eyes half closed, presence solid. Ethan listened to the building, wood contracting, wind testing seams, and felt the truth of it settle. The past would knock now and then, not loudly, not to take anything back, but to make sure the door still opened the right way. Tonight, it did. The weather turned without warning, the way it often did in the high country. No announcement, no easing in. By late afternoon, the sky lowered and thickened, clouds compressing the light until the forest seemed to lean inward. Ethan Cole read the signs as he'd learned to do. The wind backing and then surging, the temperature dropping in clean steps, the quiet that arrived before the first heavy snow. He checked the radio and heard only a faint hiss, then silence. He banked the stove and laid out extra blankets, methodical, unhurried. Briggs watched him with the steady patience of a dog that understood preparation as a language. Outside, the bay mare shifted restlessly, sensing the change. Ethan tightened her shelter, added hay, and rubbed warmth back into her neck with practiced hands. She stood square and calm, with her dark eyes following him as if memorizing the shape of his movements. He had begun to think of her as Willow, not because she had told him so, animals rarely did, but because the name fit the way she bent and held through pressure. She was 9, he guessed now, strong and durable, with a quiet endurance that matched the place. Snow began in earnest at dusk. It fell heavy and deliberate, the flakes large enough to erase edges as they landed. The road disappeared first, then the clearing. Then even the familiar angles of the tower softened until the station seemed to float in white. Ethan latched the door, not locked, and listened to the building settle around the storm. He fed the stove again, careful not to overdo it, and sat with the map spread before him, pencil resting in the margin like a question. The radio crackled once, then twice. Ethan leaned forward. "North Pine Ridge," he said, voice even. "Go ahead." The reply came fragmented, the words buffeted by wind. 2, down, near the old quarry. A pause. "Child," Ethan closed his eyes for a count, the decision already forming. The quarry lay beyond the ridge Margaret had marked, a place where sound traveled poorly and snow drifted deep. He asked for bearings, listened, translated fear into direction. The voice belonged to a man trying to keep his own calm intact. "Name's Derek Lorne," the man said. "I'm with my niece. Her name's June. She fell." "How old?" Ethan asked. 7. Ethan exhaled. "Stay put if you can. Keep her warm. I'm on my way." He packed quickly, rope, splint, radio, thermos, and clipped Briggs's harness. Willow whickered softly as he passed, sensing departure, and he pressed his forehead briefly to her neck. "Hold," he murmured. She did, patient as always. They moved into the storm, the world reduced to near distance and intent. Briggs led, his body a dark certainty against the white. The wind shoved and tested, stealing breath and sound. Ethan counted steps, checked compass, trusted the map's negative spaces where the land offered less resistance. The quarry revealed itself as a darker hollow where snow gathered in deceptive depth. They found Derek crouched over June, his coat wrapped around her small frame. Derek was in his early 40s, tall and broad through the shoulders, his beard thick and untrimmed, now crusted with ice. His face bore the hard planes of a man who had learned to take hits and keep moving, the lines around his eyes carved by work and worry. Be it he looked up with relief that cracked through his composure. "She slipped," Derek said, voice rough. "I heard it, thought I could—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "I should have known better." Ethan knelt, assessing quickly. June's face was pale but alert, her dark hair matted with snow. She was brave in the way children often were, holding pain like a secret. Ethan spoke to her directly, explaining each step, giving her something to lean on besides fear. He splinted her ankle, wrapped it tight, and checked circulation. "You did good," he told her, and meant it. The carryback was slow and exacting. Ethan and Derek shared the weight, switching off, the rope biting into gloves. Briggs moved ahead and back, checking the path, returning to June's side whenever she whimpered, his presence a steady reassurance. The storm pressed harder, snow stinging exposed skin, wind flattening sound. Ethan focused on the small tasks that made progress possible: breath, step, balance. The station emerged at last, a darker shape in the white, its windows faintly amber. Inside, warmth took hold gradually, as it always did, honest and earned. June thawed first, color blooming back into her cheeks. Ethan set her by the stove and poured sweetened tea in careful sips. Derek hovered, guilt and gratitude wrestling in his posture. He kept apologizing. Ethan waved it off without impatience. "Weather doesn't take apologies," he said. "It takes time." They stayed. The storm raged through the night, the radio spitting static, and then nothing at all. Ethan logged the rescue without names, added a mark by the quarry, and set the pencil down. He checked Willow, who stood calm in her shelter, the hay crunching softly, the world reduced to what she could touch. Near midnight, another knock came, soft, uncertain. Ethan opened the door to a woman standing alone, her hood rimed white. She was in her early 30s, slender, with a long scar along her jaw that pulled slightly when she spoke. Her eyes were a startling hazel, bright with exhaustion. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. "My car—" "Come in," Ethan replied, no questions asked. Her name was Hannah Price. She worked seasonal jobs, she said, moving when the work dried up, avoiding places where people asked too much. She warmed herself by the stove, hands shaking less with each minute. Briggs lay at her feet, accepting her presence. Ethan set soup on the table and left her space, respecting the fragile perimeter of trust. The storm finally loosened its grip before dawn. Snow fell softer, then stopped, the world left muffled in white. Derek's relief came in waves as June slept, her pain dulled and managed. Hannah slept too, wrapped in borrowed blankets, her breathing slow and even. Ethan sat with the fire, listening to the station's quiet conversation with the cold. Morning light crept in pale and thin. The storm had rearranged the land, erasing some routes and revealing others. Ethan made coffee and stepped outside to take measure. Willow stood patient, frost lacing her mane, eyes calm. The tower cut a clean line against the sky again. Derek approached, hat in his hands. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You already did," Ethan replied. "You stayed." They left later, carefully, with directions and cautions that mattered. Hannah stayed longer, helping where she could, her movements efficient and unobtrusive. She did not offer her story. Ethan did not ask. The station held space for that, too. By noon, the radio stirred again, not a plea this time, but a simple check-in from town. Word traveled quietly. Ethan answered, brief and clear, and set the radio down. He looked at the map, the new marks, the altered routes. The longest night had asked everything it could. The station had answered. Ethan fed the stove and closed the ledger. He did not feel heroic. He felt present. Outside, Willow shifted and settled. Inside, Briggs slept, one ear lifted, listening. The work would continue, not because he owed it to anyone, but because the door was latched, not locked, and the fire knew how to wait. Spring did not arrive with fanfare. It came the way the best things did here, quietly, insistently, loosening the snow a little more each day, revealing dark soil and the first stubborn blades of green. The creek ran louder now, carrying ice away in broken plates. Ethan Cole noticed the changes without measuring them, the way a person notices their own breathing after a long illness, not because it's dramatic, but because it's there again. The station woke differently in spring. Light reached the far corners by mid-morning, dust motes turning slow circles above the table. The stove burned less, but better, fed with care rather than urgency. Briggs shed his winter undercoat in soft clumps that gathered along the baseboards. Ethan swept them up and didn't mind the work. Willow, because the name had settled and stayed, moved with new energy. Her coat gleaming, her step sound. She had become a fixture, Not owned, not claimed, simply present. When Ethan left the clearing to check a route, she watched until he returned, patient as a landmark. The radio spoke more often now. Not always emergencies, sometimes just check-ins, a voice asking if the crossing held, if the creek was high. Ethan answered plainly and wrote things down, the ledger filled with marks and notes, small and exact. He kept names only when people offered them freely. Otherwise, he left space. The map gained a life of its own, lines softened by erasures and pencil dust, routes adjusted to match the land as it changed. One afternoon, Jonah Reed returned with flashing for the roof and a new ladder. He climbed without comment and worked until the metal sang true. When he finished, he stood at the edge of the tower and looked out over the valley. "It's different now," he said. "Feels like it remembers what it's for." Ethan didn't answer, but he felt the truth of it. They shared coffee on the steps, the quiet easy. Jonah left a box of nails and a note with measurements for a railing repair. He did not ask for payment. Ethan did not offer it. The exchange was complete. Hannah Price stayed through the thaw. She fixed what she could, mended a torn curtain, reorganized the shelves with a logic that made sense without explanation. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were careful and direct. The scar along her jaw caught the light when she smiled, which was rare but unguarded. One evening, as the sky went lavender, she said, "I don't need to stay forever." Ethan nodded. "You don't need to go today." The space between those statements felt like a gift. Alain Pike came by with seed packets and advice that carried the weight of seasons. Margaret Cole wrote letters that arrived irregularly, folded neat, offering news from town and nothing more. Derek and June returned once in clear weather, bringing bread and a drawing of the tower colored in careful strokes. June waved at Briggs until he sat for her, solemn and pleased. The sign went up without ceremony. Ethan painted it himself on a plank Jonah salvaged, letters plain and readable, North Pine Ridge Refuge. Beneath it, smaller, shelter, silence, safety. He hung it by the gate and stepped back. It was not an invitation so much as a truth. People came, not many at once, not loudly. A pair of siblings whose truck died before the pass. An older man who needed a place to wait out a storm and never said why. A woman with a limp and a laugh that arrived late to her face. Each time, Ethan answered the door, latched, not locked. Each time, the fire did its work. There were hard days, too. A call that came too late. A route that failed despite careful marking. Ethan carried those with the same steadiness he carried the rest, speaking little, writing what mattered, learning where to set the next line. He found that the weight of staying did not crush him. It shaped him. On a clear morning at the edge of summer, Ethan stood by the tower and looked out. The valley stretched wide and green, the road visible now as a pale ribbon. Inside, the station hummed with the low sounds of use. Briggs lay in the shade, one ear lifted. Willow grazed near the fence, content. Ethan thought of Seattle's clean edges and quick exits, of the man he had been when he arrived here with a duffel, and a decision he didn't yet trust. He had not fixed everything. He had not solved the weather or the reasons people lost their way. He had learned instead to keep a door and a fire, to listen when the night knocked softly, to answer without needing a story in return. He went inside and closed the ledger for the day. The last entry was brief. Spring roots holding. Creek high by afternoon. Fire steady. He set the pencil down and felt the quiet settle, not empty but full. Outside, wind moved through the trees, a sound that no longer asked him to run. When dusk came, the windows glowed gold. The tower cut a clean line against the sky. Ethan fed the stove one last piece of wood and sat back, letting the warmth reach him. Briggs sighed and slept. Willow shifted and settled. The station held. The fire stayed. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through a door left unlocked, a fire kept burning, a hand that chooses not to turn away. Maybe God doesn't always change the storm. Maybe he places someone inside it so others don't have to face the cold alone. In a world that moves too fast, this story reminds us that faith can be simple, to stay when it would be easier to leave, to listen when the night calls softly, to believe that even the forgotten are still seen by God. If this story touched your heart, let it move your hands too. Share it with someone who feels lost, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe in quiet miracles, in second chances, and in love that doesn't ask for credit, subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can find their way home. May God bless you and protect you. May He keep a light in your darkness and warmth in your waiting. And may none of us ever walk through fear alone. Amen.